The strange thing was not that Ethan Walker had saved the princess from the fire. The strange thing was that the kingdom wanted him punished for it. He stood in the center of the crystal court with both hands wrapped in white medical gauze. His dark work jacket still stained with ash, his hair damp from emergency foam, and the smell of smoke clinging to him like a second skin. Around him, the nobles of Orlith watched from their floating balconies, silent and bright-eyed, their silver robes glowing under the blue lights of the royal hall. None of them looked grateful. Not one. To them, Ethan was not a rescuer. He was a human, a maintenance engineer from Earth, a man paid to check pressure lines, seal broken vents, and keep palace machines from failing during ceremonies too expensive for him to understand. He was 34 years old, white-skinned, tired-eyed, and ordinary in a room built to worship bloodlines. Above him, the ceiling curved like frozen starlight. Beneath him, the glass floor reflected his small, smoke-dark shape back at him. At the far end of the hall, Queen Eleanor Vale sat on a throne carved from living crystal, her face calm enough to frighten everyone more than anger ever could. Her crown rose behind her like a halo of knives made of light. Beside the throne hung a transparent veil of pale blue energy. Behind it, barely visible, Princess Arya Vale stood with one hand resting against a healer's rail, her luminous eyes fixed on Ethan. She was alive. That should have been enough. But the court did not breathe like it was enough. A royal guard stepped forward and struck the base of his spear against the floor. The sound moved through the hall like thunder trapped under ice. "Ethan Walker of Earth," he said, "you are accused of violating the law of untouched blood." A low murmur rolled through the balconies. Ethan did not move. His fingers ached beneath the gauze. Each small pulse of pain reminded him of the door handle, the heat, the hallway bending under blue fire, and the princess telling him to leave her there. He had not listened. He could still feel the weight of her body in his arms, light but shaking, proud even when the smoke took her voice. He remembered giving her his oxygen mask. He remembered her staring at him like mercy was a language no one had taught her. The queen leaned forward. The entire kingdom seemed to lean with her. "Human," she said, not loudly, but the word reached every wall. "Did you touch my daughter?" Ethan looked at the guards, then at the nobles, then at Arya, standing behind the veil, alive because he had carried her through 40 feet of burning crystal and collapsing light. He could have explained the smoke, the locked chamber, the broken alarm, the way no one else had entered. He could have said he did not know their law, but that would have sounded like regret. So Ethan lifted his tired eyes to the throne and answered, "Yes." The court erupted in whispers. Arya's hand tightened against the rail. The queen did not blink. And in Orlith, Ethan realized, saving a princess was not always enough to survive touching her. 20 minutes earlier, Ethan Walker had been under the East Service deck with a flashlight between his teeth, one knee on a cold pipe, and palace dust falling into his hair like gray snow. Above him, the royal ceremony filled the Crystal Palace with music too perfect to feel real. It moved through the walls in low silver notes, soft enough to sound holy, expensive enough to remind him he did not belong there. Ethan had been sent to check a pressure warning in the fire suppression grid, a small blinking light no one in the upper halls cared about because the nobles of Orlith believed their palace could not fail. He knew better. Anything built by hands could break. Anything sealed too tightly could become a trap. He ran his scanner along the pipe and watched the numbers jump, then fall, then jump again. The air smelled wrong. Not like smoke yet. Like hot glass, burned copper, and rain on an electrical line. Ethan froze. His father had once told him that machines whispered before they screamed. On Earth, that sounded like an old mechanic trying to scare a kid into paying attention. In space, it had saved Ethan more than once. He pulled the emergency panel open and saw frost crawling backward across a heated valve. That was not possible unless the plasma lines above the ceremonial wing were venting into the cooling system. He reached for his radio. "East Service deck to Palace Control," he said. "You have a pressure bleed near the royal chamber. I need authorization to shut down line 7. Static answered. Then a calm Orlith voice replied. "Human technician, line 7 supports the royal light canopy. It cannot be interrupted during the procession." Ethan looked up. Through the ceiling, through 15 feet of crystal and polished alloy, the ceremony continued. Thousands of guests. A queen on a living throne. A princess beneath a crown of light. Then move the procession, Ethan said. The radio went quiet for half a second too long. That is not your place to command. The first tremor hit before he could answer. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. A deep, soft pressure rolled through the deck, and every pipe around him shuddered like something alive had taken a breath. The music above broke into a shriek of alarms. Blue-white light flashed through the maintenance grates. Ethan dropped the scanner and ran. By the time he reached the upper corridor, the palace had changed shape in the smoke. The walls glowed from within. Curtains of pale fire crawled along the ceiling without touching the floor. Orolith guards stood at the entrance to the ceremonial wing, their silver armor reflecting the flames, but none of them crossed the threshold. Their biological shields sparked whenever they stepped close. Ethan grabbed a fire mask from the wall and shoved it over his face. "Who was inside?" he asked. No one answered. Their eyes moved away from him. That was when he heard it. 3 faint taps from behind the warped chamber door. Then silence. Ethan stepped closer. A guard caught his arm. "You cannot enter." Ethan looked at the door, then at the polished spear blocking his chest. "Someone is still in there." The guard's face tightened. "That chamber holds royal blood." Ethan pulled his arm free. "Then royal blood is breathing smoke." He took the thermal axe from the emergency case, felt the handle lock into his burned and calloused palms, and walked toward the blue fire while the kingdom watched him do the one thing none of them would. Ethan had been near fire before, but Orolith flame did not move like anything born on earth. It crawled sideways across the walls in pale blue sheets, silent until it touched metal, then it sang with a thin glassy scream that made his teeth ache behind the mask. His boots stuck to the crystal floor where the surface had softened under the heat. Every step pulled at him. Every breath tasted like copper through the filter. The thermal axe hummed in his hands, its orange blade shaking against the pressure building inside the ceremonial wing. The door ahead had folded inward like paper left in the rain. Beyond it, the chamber glowed too brightly to look at for more than a second. Ethan lowered his visor and swung. The first strike bounced hard enough to rattle his shoulders. The second carved a white line through the warped lock. The third made the whole door groan open 6 inches. Smoke rolled through the gap and wrapped around him like a living thing. He dropped to one knee, pushed his shoulder into the frame, and forced himself through. Inside, the royal chamber looked less like a room and more like the inside of a dying star. Crystal banners hung from the ceiling, their edges melting into threads of light. A fountain of ceremonial mist hissed uselessly in the corner. The air shimmered with heat. Then he saw her. Princess Arya Vale stood near the far side of the chamber, trapped behind a curved panel of transparent crystal that had sagged from the ceiling and sealed her against the wall. She was taller than Ethan expected, slender and luminous even through the smoke, her blue-silver skin reflecting the fire in soft waves. Her white hair had come loose from its jeweled pins and drifted around her face like moonlight underwater. One hand pressed against the crystal. The other held the edge of her ceremonial cloak away from the flame. Her crown sat crooked above eyes that did not look frightened. Not yet. They looked offended that death had entered without permission. Ethan moved toward her, staying low. "Princess," he called through the mask. "Can you walk?" Her glowing eyes sharpened on him. For 1 second, she seemed more startled. By him than by the fire. "Human," she said, her voice thin through the barrier. "You cannot be here." That seems to be the general opinion. He scanned the panel. Too thick to break clean. Too hot to touch. The locking seam was 6 feet above the floor, buried behind a strip of living crystal. "Are you hurt?" "Leave this chamber." That was not the question. Her jaw tightened. Even trapped, even surrounded by smoke, she carried herself like the room still belonged to her. "If you touch me, your life is forfeit." Ethan paused long enough to look at her face. There was no cruelty in the warning, only certainty. She was not threatening him. She was telling him the shape of her world. Behind him, something heavy fell in the corridor with a deep, ringing crash. The floor trembled. His suit display flashed a red oxygen warning at the corner of his visor. 8 minutes on the tank if he stayed calm. Less if he did not. Ethan lifted the axe again. "Where I come from, we have a different rule." Arya watched him cut into the seam. Sparks burst across his gloves and scattered over the floor like fireflies. "What rule?" He leaned into the tool until the crystal began to split. "If someone is still breathing, You do not leave them behind. For the first time, her expression changed. Only slightly. A small break in the royal mask. Confusion, maybe. Or curiosity. The panel gave way with a sound like ice cracking over deep water. Hot air rushed out and knocked Ethan back a step. He caught himself, reached through the opening, and held out his hand. Arya looked at it as if it were a weapon, a chain, and a miracle all at once. I said you will die. Ethan pulled the oxygen mask from his own face, pressed it into her hands, and felt the heat bite his lungs. His voice came out rough, but steady. Then breathe faster. Arya stared at him over the mask, and in the blue fire, for one impossible second, the Princess of Orlith looked less like a crown and more like a girl who had just discovered that a stranger could choose her life over his own. Arya did not take the oxygen mask at first. Her fingers hovered near it, pale blue against the black rubber seal, as if accepting breath from a human required more courage than facing the fire. Ethan did not wait for permission. He pressed the mask gently into her hands, then turned toward the broken opening he had carved through the crystal. The chamber groaned above them. Thin cracks spread across the ceiling in bright branching lines, each one filling with blue flame. His lungs pulled in hot air and rejected it. He coughed once, hard, then forced himself upright. We have to move, he said. Arya fitted the mask over her mouth, and the first breath made her eyes widen. Not because of relief, because the seal still carried the warmth of his face. The thought passed across her expression before she could bury it beneath the old royal training. Ethan saw it. He looked away, giving her the dignity of not being studied. That was the second strange thing. Orlith nobles stared at weakness until it became shame. This human glanced aside, as if her fear belonged to her alone. He stepped through the broken panel and offered his arm. Can you stand? She straightened too quickly. Pride lifted her before strength did. Her knees nearly failed under the weight of the ceremonial armor, and Ethan caught her by the elbow. The contact set off a sharp chime from the wall. A red symbol bloomed above them, pulsing like an angry star. Arya looked at it and went still. The blood law? She whispered through the mask. Ethan followed her gaze. That alarm is because I touched your arm? Because you touched royal skin during a sealed rite. Good to know. He shifted his grip more firmly around her shoulders. The alarm grew louder. Then it can complain while we leave. He guided her toward the door. The heat in the corridor hit them in waves. 40 feet to the service passage. Maybe 50. The floor had split near the center, leaving a glowing seam where the lower systems vented pressure into the hall. Ethan scanned it through watering eyes. The safest path was along the left wall, beneath a row of hanging crystal ribs that shivered every time the palace structure shifted. He moved first, placing his boot where the glass still looked solid. Arya followed, one hand gripping his sleeve. Her hand was light, but he felt it through the fabric like a question. At the first bend, a curtain of blue flame dropped from the ceiling, silent and sudden. Ethan shoved Arya back against the wall and put himself between her and the heat. His jacket smoked along the shoulder. He did not cry out. He only lowered his head and waited for the fire to thin. Arya stared at the side of his face. Sweat ran through the ash on his cheek. His jaw was locked. His breathing came shallow and rough without the mask. You are in pain, she said. Ethan looked down the corridor. Not my favorite day at work. Why do you make jokes when your body is failing? Because it is better than making speeches. The answer confused her more than any philosophy could have. She had heard generals praise sacrifice in rooms far from danger. She had watched priests sing about courage beneath polished domes. But this man did not name what he was doing. He just did it, one painful step at a time. They reached a fallen support beam blocking the hall. It glowed dull orange at the edges, too hot for bare skin, too heavy for Arya to climb over alone. Ethan checked the ceiling, then crouched and laced his hands together. Step here. That is forbidden. A lot of things are on fire right now, princess. She looked at his joined hands. Calloused. Human. Trembling slightly. Then she stepped onto them. Ethan lifted her carefully, not as a servant lifting royalty, and not as a man touching something forbidden, but as one living being helping another over the only path left. Her silver blood had touched his sleeve where the crystal had cut her ceremonial armor. The stain shimmered against the black fabric, small and bright as a captured star. She saw it. So did he. Neither of them spoke. When she reached the other side, The hall behind Ethan shifted with a deep metallic sigh. A section of the ceiling loosened above him, glowing dust spilling down in a slow, beautiful warning. Arya reached back without thinking. This time, she touched him first. "Ethan," she said, using his name like she had just found it in the smoke. He looked up, surprised that she knew it. Then he climbed after her, and the palace began to fall behind them. The palace did not collapse all at once. It failed in pieces, like a giant trying not to fall asleep. First came the ceiling behind them, dropping in a soft roar of crystal dust and blue sparks. Then the floor tilted 3 inches to the left, just enough to send Arya sliding against Ethan before both of them caught the wall. Somewhere deep below, pressure valves opened with a mournful howl, and the whole corridor filled with white steam. Ethan could not see more than 10 feet ahead. His throat felt lined with sandpaper. Every breath without the mask was smaller than the last. Arya noticed. Of course she noticed. She had been raised in courts where a flicker of the eye could mean betrayal, where silence had weight and posture had law. The human beside her was fading by inches, and still he kept one hand against the wall, guiding her through smoke he could barely stand in. "Take it back," she said, lifting the oxygen mask away from her face. Ethan shook his head once. "Keep breathing. That is an order. You are not my supervisor." It should not have made her pause. It should not have warmed something in her chest while the corridor burned cold blue around them. But it did. No one spoke to Princess Arya Vale that way. Not without fear. Not without calculation. Ethan said it like a man too tired to remember he was supposed to be afraid. Ahead, a small emergency hatch glowed under a layer of ash. Ethan wiped the panel with his sleeve and saw the faded letters in 6 languages. Shelter pocket. Manual seal. Capacity 2. He pressed the release. Nothing happened. He tried again. The hatch stuttered open 4 inches, then stopped with a grinding sound. Arya placed her hand against the royal override stone beside it. The stone flashed, recognized her bloodline, and opened the hatch with a tired hiss. Ethan almost laughed. "Now it listens." "Most things do," she said softly. They slipped inside. The shelter pocket was no bigger than a walk-in closet, maybe 6 feet across, with ribbed metal walls, a cracked bench, and one emergency oxygen cylinder locked beneath a transparent cover. The hatch sealed behind them. The outside noise dimmed to a distant storm. For the first time since he entered the fire, there was stillness. Not safety, just a thin, fragile pause. Ethan leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for half a second. Arya watched the way his shoulders trembled once, then forced themselves steady. The gauze on his right glove had darkened from heat. His face was streaked with ash. Human skin, she thought, was so easily marked, so easily damaged. And yet he had walked through flame as if his body was less important than a stranger's next breath. The oxygen cylinder clicked when she pulled it free. Its gauge showed 12%. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe less with 2 people. Ethan saw the number and reached for the mask still in her hand. For one foolish second, she thought he had finally accepted reason. Then he fastened the cylinder to her mask and pushed it back toward her. "Princesses first," he said. Arya stared at him. "Is that a law of Earth?" His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. More like a bad habit. She pushed the mask back toward him. "You need it more. You are the one they are waiting for. And you are the one who came." The words hung between them, quieter than smoke, heavier than law. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, not at the crown, not at the glowing markings beneath her skin, not at the title the whole palace would kill to protect. He looked at the person sitting 2 feet away, holding a mask she did not want to keep because he needed it too. Outside, the fire pressed against the hatch like a living ocean. Inside, Arya lifted the mask to his face with both hands. He could have pulled away. He did not. He took one breath. Only one. Then he guided it gently back to her. "We share," he said. Arya had been given jewels, ships, languages, and planets in her name. No gift had ever frightened her like half a breath from a dying human shelter pocket. The oxygen cylinder died with a soft click that sounded far too small for the end of hope. Ethan heard it before Arya did. The whisper through the mask thinned, then vanished, and the green light on the valve faded into a dull gray dot. For a second, neither of them moved. The shelter pocket held. Its silence around them, 6 feet of metal, ash, and borrowed breath. Outside, the blue fire rolled over the hatch in waves, pressing heat through the seams until the walls ticked and shivered. Ethan pushed himself upright, one hand against the ribbed wall, the other searching for the manual release. His fingers did not close right. Heat had stiffened them. Pain moved under the gauze in slow white pulses. Arya saw him hide it badly. That was the thing about humans, she was learning. They did not hide pain like Orlith nobles. Nobles turned pain into posture. Ethan turned pain into motion. There is another exit, she said, pointing toward a narrow maintenance plate near the floor. A royal passage. It was built for evacuation during an invasion. Ethan crouched, wiped ash from the small panel, and found a lock shaped like a spiral of living glass. No handle, no keypad, just a shallow groove in the center, dark and waiting. Let me guess, he said, his voice rough. It only opens for you. Arya knelt beside him. The emergency light painted her face in silver and blue. Without the mask, her breathing had become careful, measured, royal even now. It opens for royal blood. Ethan looked at the thin, bright line already dried along her wrist where the chamber crystal had cut through her ceremonial glove. And you were going to mention that when you stopped almost collapsing. That could be a while. The small joke fell between them, weaker than before, but still alive. Arya looked at him for one heartbeat too long. Then she pressed her wrist to the groove. The lock woke instantly. Pale light raced from the door into the walls, through the floor, across hidden veins of crystal beneath their knees. A soft chime sounded. Then another. Then the chamber turned red. Ethan did not need a translator to understand the alarm. Arya closed her eyes. It detected contamination. Because of me. Because your hand touched my blood. Ethan stared at the glowing warning symbol. He thought of the guards outside, the spear that had stopped him, the law he had ignored because a life was trapped behind a door. He thought of Earth, of fire drills and school gyms, of old signs that said exit first and questions later. Can it still open? He asked. Arya opened her eyes. Something in them had changed. Less crown. More storm. Yes. Then let it be offended. The passage door slid open into darkness. Heat spilled in behind them as the shelter hatch began to buckle. Ethan went first, crawling into the narrow tunnel, then turned back and reached for her. This time Arya did not hesitate. She placed her hand in his and let him guide her through a passage barely wide enough for his shoulders. The tunnel sloped upward for 30 feet, maybe 40, lined with old crystal veins and dust that had not been touched in generations. Behind them, the shelter pocket gave a tired metallic groan and sealed itself under the fire. Ahead, a second door glowed with daylight from the palace's outer hall. Voices waited beyond it. Many voices. Guards. Healers. Nobles. The surviving ceremony. Ethan pushed the final plate open and climbed out first. Cold air hit his face like mercy. He turned, helped Arya through, and nearly fell when his knees touched the glass floor. She came out after him, luminous and smoke-streaked, alive beneath a crooked crown. For one breath, the whole hall froze. Then the royal alarm above them screamed the words in Orlith and English. Unauthorized human contact with royal blood. The guards did not run to help. They formed a circle, their silver spears lowered, not striking, only shining with warning light. Ethan stayed on one knee, too tired to stand. Arya stepped in front of him before anyone ordered her to move. Her hand still held his. Her blood still marked his sleeve. And from the far end of the hall, where the smoke opened like a curtain, Queen Eleanor Vale arrived without a word. Queen Eleanor Vale did not rush to her daughter. That was what Ethan noticed first through the gray blur at the edge of his vision. The queen stood at the end of the outer hall, tall and still beneath the ruined canopy lights, her silver crown reflecting the emergency glow like frozen lightning. Around her, nobles bowed so quickly their robes whispered across the glass floor. Guards lowered their spears a fraction. Healers stopped with their hands half raised. Even the alarm seemed smaller when she arrived. Arya released Ethan's hand only when she saw his knees begin to give. She caught his sleeve instead, steadying him with a grip that would have been forbidden 20 minutes ago and impossible 10 minutes before that. The queen saw it. Everyone saw it. The silver mark of Arya's blood on Ethan's jacket shone brighter than the fire behind them. A royal physician finally stepped forward, but a high noble in white crystal robes blocked the path. "Majesty," he said, voice sharp with outrage, "the human has violated sacred contact law." Arya turned toward him, smoke in her hair, oxygen mask hanging loose in one hand. He saved my life. The fact is acknowledged, the noble said, without looking at her. The crime remains. Ethan almost laughed, but the breath would have hurt too much. Of all the things he had expected after pulling someone out of a burning chamber, a legal argument had not made the list. The queen raised one hand. No one spoke again. Take my daughter to the healers, she said. Arya stiffened. Mother. Now. The word held no anger, only command polished by a lifetime of being obeyed. Two physicians approached carefully. Arya allowed them near, but her eyes stayed on Ethan until a translucent medical veil rose between them. Through it, she watched guards guide him away from the smoke and into the heart of the crystal court, not as a patient, but as a prisoner who was too exhausted to resist. The trial began before the fire was fully out. That was the Orlith way. Order first. Mercy later, if there was time. Ethan stood where he had stood in the beginning, beneath the towering blue lights and the cold gaze of thousands. His hands had been wrapped in fresh white gauze. His lungs still scraped when he breathed. Each inhale carried the clean artificial scent of royal medicine and the ghost of smoke he could not stop tasting. Above him, the nobles gathered in rings of floating balconies, their faces beautiful and unreadable, their voices low and restless. They spoke of bloodlines, contamination, precedent, and punishment. Not once did they speak of the sound behind the door. Not once did they speak of the 3 faint taps that had made Ethan run toward the fire. Lord Vaylor, the noble in white, stepped into the center light. No kingdom can survive if sacred law bends to emotion, he declared. If a human may touch the princess and be praised for it, then every boundary protecting this throne becomes a suggestion. A murmur of agreement moved through the court. Ethan looked toward the medical veil. Arya stood behind it, pale but upright, one hand pressed against the glowing surface as if it were the only thing keeping her from crossing the room. Queen Eleanor watched Ethan from the throne. You heard the charge, she said. You understand the penalty. Ethan nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Knowing this now, would you have acted differently? The hall went still. Even Arya stopped breathing for a second. Ethan looked down at his bandaged hands. He remembered the heat, the cracking crystal, the mask pressed into Arya's trembling fingers. He remembered her telling him to leave. He remembered not being able to. When he lifted his eyes, there was no pride in them, no challenge, only the tired honesty of a man who had already answered the question with his body. I would do it again, he said. The words landed softer than a shout and heavier than a sentence. Somewhere behind the veil, Arya bowed her head. And for the first time, the court of Orlith had no law ready for a human who was not sorry for saving a life. The silence after Ethan's answer did not break. It deepened. It moved through the crystal court like cold water poured into a glass, filling every balcony, every polished stair, every noble mouth that had been so eager to speak a moment before. Queen Eleanor Vale remained seated, one hand resting on the arm of her living crystal throne, her eyes fixed on the human below. Ethan could not tell whether she hated him. That was the terrible thing about her face. It offered nothing to hold on to. No anger. No mercy. Only the weight of a ruler who had learned long ago that emotions were safest behind stone. Lord Vaylor stepped forward again, encouraged by the quiet. Majesty, the human has confessed. The law is clear. The queen did not look at him. Yes, she said. The law is clear. Arya's fingers pressed harder against the medical veil until the surface shimmered around her hand. Ethan saw the panic she was trying not to show. Even through the blue barrier, even with healers standing near her, she looked ready to walk back into fire if it meant crossing the room. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Not much, just enough for her to see. Do not. She saw it. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The queen finally rose. Every light in the hall dimmed as if the palace itself had bowed. The law of untouched blood was written 400 years ago, she said, her voice calm and absolute. It was written after the Third Succession War, when royal heirs were harmed in corridors by those who claimed affection, loyalty, and rescue as excuses to get close. The nobles lowered their heads in solemn agreement. Lord Vaylor's expression softened with satisfaction. Ethan stood still, trying to breathe quietly. The queen descended the crystal steps one at a time. For 4 centuries, The law has protected my family from ambition disguised as kindness. She stopped at the center of the hall, close enough now that Ethan could see fine lines of silver under her eyes. Not age exactly, but history. But laws have shadows. The court stirred. Valar's satisfaction faded. Queen Eleanor lifted her hand, and above the glass floor a holographic image bloomed. The ceremonial chamber appeared in pale blue light. The pressure valve, the sealed door, the fire suppression grid. Ethan's stomach tightened when he saw the service panel he had opened minutes before the blast. Then the image shifted. A hidden figure moved through the maintenance level in white crystal robes. Lord Valar went rigid. The queen did not turn toward him yet. The fire was not an accident, she said. Line 7 was manually locked open. The alarm relay was delayed. The royal chamber door was sealed from the outside. The court's silence changed shape. It was no longer judgment. It was fear. Arya stared at the image as if the palace had betrayed her with its own memory. Ethan looked from the hologram to the queen, understanding too late that this trial had never truly been about his hands. It had been about theirs. Queen Eleanor faced the nobles. My daughter was left behind by those sworn to protect her. My guards waited for permission. My court waited for law. My blood waited for someone worthy to enter. Her gaze moved to Ethan's bandaged hands. For the first time, the coldness in her face cracked, just enough for something human to pass through, though she was not human at all. Lord Valar tried to speak. Majesty, this is manipulation. The human contamination of royal blood remains the central offense. The queen turned on him then, and the hall seemed to shrink around her. No, she said. The central offense is that a stranger from Earth understood duty while my own nobles debated purity. Valar took one step back. No guard touched him. None needed to. The truth had already placed its hand on his shoulder. Queen Eleanor looked across the court, balcony by balcony, face by face. Then she spoke the words that no one in Orlith would forget. You asked whether he was worthy to touch royal blood. I ask whether any of you were worthy to be protected by his. The sentence fell through the kingdom like a crown hitting stone. Arya closed her eyes, and one bright tear slipped down her smoke-streaked cheek. Ethan looked at the floor, because he did not know what to do with honor when it was handed to him in a room that had almost condemned him for mercy. No one knelt at first. That was what made the moment heavier than any order Queen Eleanor could have given. The nobles of Orlith stood frozen in their rings of glass and light, caught between the law they had worshipped and the truth now glowing beneath their feet. The hologram still hovered above the court, replaying the locked valve, the delayed alarm, the white-robed hand that had sealed Princess Arya inside. Lord Valar did not speak again. He only stared at the floor as two royal guards stepped beside him, their spears held low, not with fury, but with the quiet certainty of justice finally arriving. Ethan watched it all through a haze of exhaustion. He had expected punishment. He had expected questions. He had not expected an empire to look ashamed. Queen Eleanor turned back to him. For the first time, she did not say human like a category. She said it like a name she was still learning to respect. Ethan Walker of Earth, she said. You entered fire when my own court stood outside it. You broke a law made for protection, but you did not break its purpose. Ethan swallowed. His throat still burned from smoke, and the royal medicine made the lights blur at the edges. Your Majesty, he said, I was not trying to insult your kingdom. I know. The answer was softer than the court expected. Softer than Ethan expected. Behind the medical veil, Arya placed both hands against the blue surface. The queen glanced toward her daughter, and something passed between them that no translator could carry. A mother's fear. A ruler's restraint. A daughter's silent plea. Then Queen Eleanor lifted one hand. The medical veil lowered. Arya stepped out before anyone could stop her. Her ceremonial cloak was gone, replaced by a simple healer's robe that made her look less distant, less untouchable, and somehow more royal than before. Her crown was still crooked. She did not fix it. She crossed the glass floor slowly, every noble eye following her, until she stood before Ethan. He tried to bow. His knees betrayed him. Arya caught his bandaged hands with both of hers, careful as if she were holding something breakable and sacred. A murmur moved through the court, but it died when the queen looked up. Arya studied the gauze around his palms, the ash along his sleeves, the silver mark where her blood had dried against human fabric. You should have left me, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her, tired and honest. I know. Her luminous eyes narrowed, confused by the answer. Then why did you not? He thought of the 3 faint taps behind the door. The small sound in all that fire. The kind of sound a person could spend the rest of his life hearing if he walked away from it. Because you were still there, he said. It was not a speech. It was barely a sentence. But across the crystal court, the first noble lowered his head. Then another. Then an entire balcony bent in silence. No command had been given. No anthem played. The kingdom knelt because mercy had made their pride feel small. Queen Eleanor descended the last step from her throne and stood beside her daughter. Let the record show, she said, that the law of untouched blood ends today. From this hour forward, no life in Orlith shall be less sacred because of birth, species, rank, or skin. Ethan looked down, overwhelmed by the sound of thousands kneeling around him. Arya did not let go of his hands. Outside the broken palace windows, ash from the fire drifted across the night sky, like pale snow over the crystal towers. The stars beyond looked distant, cold, and endless. But in Arya's eyes, reflected beside them, Ethan saw something warmer than stars. He saw understanding. He had not come to change a kingdom. He had not carried a princess through blue fire to become a legend. He had only done what humans sometimes did when the universe made cruelty look reasonable. He had reached for someone still breathing. And in a kingdom ruled by blood, that was enough to teach them that mercy could be nobler than birth.